Welcome to the show, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good, Gary. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, good to have you. I'm excited about this because, as I said, I've been listening to you for years, and your approach, having been an NFL scout and seen things the way the NFL people look at it, so much different than how we look at it as sports talk radio show hosts or fans. And I want to start with Alabama because really what got me thinking about getting you on the show was reading your story about how Nick Saban stays on top of recruiting and how he takes an NFL approach, a template-type approach. I know Bill Belichick's done it in the NFL. A guy's got to have certain measurables to play a certain position. There is a scouting grade attached to that player in the draft, and that's the way they formulate their draft plan. In college football, we see 4-star, 3-star, 5-star. You say that means nothing to an NFL scout. That's something these recruiting services use to get fan interest, but it means nothing. Nick Saban has attached that very similar scouting system and grade system to high school players, and that really has been the key to his recruiting, in your opinion, correct?
Well, it has. We were Nick and I were on Belichick's staff in Cleveland, and when he went to Michigan State, he took some of that over, and we kind of worked through it and how it could fit for him at the college level. And it basically is simply this: it's when you grade a player, you grade them in depending on the position. You've got a certain amount of critical factors for every position. So you could have, say, for a receiver, you'll have 9 critical factors, 8-9 critical factors, and another 6 or so position specifics. So it's not as simple as, hey, that guy looks good. It's that guy catches the ball well. You have to be descriptive as a scout, and it's really important. There's an art to it because, like any writer or broadcaster like yourself, you've got to describe it, and you have to assume that the coach that is hearing you hasn't seen the guy play. So you have to paint a mental picture. So when you're talking about a receiver's hands, good hands means nothing.
Right.
Are they hard, they soft, or they're big? Can he snatch the ball away from his body? Or does he trap it into his body? What's his eye-hand coordination? Consistency in catching the football. When we're talking about athletic ability, we're talking about quickness, agility, and balance, something we call quads, and go on, and then we take the different areas, got it up on the website. But, it's so when you're describing a guy's hands, you have to describe in very descriptive terms what makes his hands good or average, and then you have to put a number on it. It's really important that if you say his hands are great to very good, that will correspond to a 6.9 grade or a 6.5 grade. So it's not as simple as, well, good hands. Well, are they good? Are they great? Are they 6.4 good? Are they 6.5 good? Are they 6.9 good? Are they 7.0, which is outstanding? Those are really important, and it's a way to check yourself. So oftentimes, as a coach or a scout, you're writing up the player, and you may write him up, and he may sound like someone that you should give a 7.0 grade with his hand, but you give him a 6.5. So it's a checkpoint. Hey, wait a minute, I wrote him up as a 7.0, it sounds like, but I gave him a 6.5. And it's a way to kind of catch yourself as a scout to say, you know what, I didn't give the right number on the guy. Or maybe I didn't, it appears to me he's got only 6.5 hands, but maybe I didn't do a good job of explaining it. So you do that, and he trains. He's got the largest staff in the country, and he trains a lot of young guys to do this, a lot of analysts to do this, and then it's graduate assistants, and it goes up gradually to the position coach, then to the coordinator, and ultimately Nick. So Nick doesn't look at, 3,000 guys, but he looks at guys as they've been kind of cleaned up, and he doesn't offer a guy unless he himself has looked at him. But when you put that grade on the player, then you really can determine where the best fit is. And I think the most misunderstood part about recruiting is, the sales part. Oh, you can bring them in. It doesn't matter if you can bring them in if you're bringing in the wrong guys.
Right.
And if you don't find the right guys that fit your system, it doesn't matter. So the critical factors are going to be how he sees them. He wants bigger corners. There's certain things that he wants in a corner, in a safety, and he changes it. He evolves. Safety's no longer the guys that were great in the past, the Mark Barron type guys that were more fits as like those guys are more linebackers criteria, critical factors now. He wants guys that have a little bit more cover ability at safety and more interchangeable at safety and corner, as opposed to years ago, because the college game has changed offensively and what you're having to defend. And he does that. And he really hones in specifically on what he needs at each position on defense. Now, on offense, he's a little bit more flexible. He'll take a great talent on offense, and he'll kind of fit, how that guy's going to play, and we'll figure out a way to get him on the field and be explosive, getting the football as a back or a receiver or tight end. But that's a long-winded way. I apologize. And going into detail of how he does it, and he obviously does, and of course he does a lot of painstaking detail of the academics, the football competitive character, the personal character, the family background, all those things, because it doesn't do any good if a guy fits all those characters if he's, how do I put it politely, a little flaky,
right?
And, after, a year, maybe flakes out and doesn't want to play football anymore. Is not real, competitive, or, not real committed to the game. Well, all these guys need to be developed, and nobody develops players better than Nick Saban. So you can have the talent, but if a guy doesn't have the great capacity and willingness to learn and doesn't have that combination, well, then, you've just got a good talent that's never going to develop because they really don't have that passion to do so. And many of them do not.
I'm glad you went into great insight, Chris, because I think it gives the listeners more of an idea of how he recruits. Chris Landry, our guest here on the Gary Harris Show. You can follow him on Twitter at Landry Football. And if you want access to your own NFL scouting department for less than a magazine subscription, NFL draft boards and scouting reports, NFL free agency analysis, plus all of next football season, a complete year's worth of inside the film room analysis, get on board today at LandryFootball.com. I guarantee you, you're going to enjoy it. All right, let's put it this way, Chris, because I think people that are listening will really get this, because you pointed out there are factors outside of height, weight, and speed and so forth that he looks at, particularly in recruiting a college football player when you're talking about getting acclimated to a campus and a town and all that stuff. But basically, from a template standpoint, let me phrase it this way for you. Let's say at a certain position, Coach Saban and the coaching staff have dictated a guy needs to be at least this height, this weight, and run this speed. That doesn't mean that somebody won't get recruited that doesn't fall into that category, but that's where it starts for that particular position. And for someone who doesn't fit those measurables, they're going to have to show some other things in an exceptional way. Am I correct in that analysis?
Absolutely. And it's really important to understand that, guys, there are always exceptions. There are exceptions to the rule. But, for example, if you're a defensive tackle and you don't fit the measurables of what they ideally look for, then you are going to have some qualities that allow you to overcome that. And if you don't, and you just say, oh, boy, this guy is just a playing fool in high school, well, remember that when you're going from high school to college or college to the NFL, and I'm involved in doing both, remember, it's not how productive a guy is, it's how productive you project him to be. You're not giving an award, an all-conference or all-district award. You're trying to project how he's going to be onto the college level and then the NFL level. So, for example, if you're someone and you like ideally for a guy to be a minimum of 6'0", 2'5", or 6'2" and 5/8 on the defensive tackle position, and they're 6'1" and 5/8, well, of course they can still play. But if they're a little short, a little undersized, they better be so quick that they can generate that explosiveness that a guy that's a little bigger can. And with a larger roster size in college, you can have guys in situations. Guys a little bit undersized can be a little bit more effective against the pass, but may not be as stout against the run as he likes. So, again, you have to take all of that into account. And when I talk about the critical factors and position specifics, it is as detailed as we rank the importance. So when I say there's 7 critical factors for defensive tackles, they're 1 through 7 how they rank, and the position specifics rank 1 through 9 on that. So if you have the way to break ties on setting up your board, if you got guys that overall you give the same grade, you go back to the critical factors and position specifics, and you start to break ties. Well, wait a minute, he's a little bit higher in the most important qualities. So it just helps you separate guys on the board. The difference between obviously a recruiting board and an NFL draft board is you setting them up on your board in the draft, and you're trying to decide who you're going to take when it's your turn to pick. The great thing about college recruiting is you can go and you can get your top 3 guys on your board, but you're not going to be able to do that in the NFL in the draft. But when you set them in pecking order, that determines who you want to go after and who you want to sign. But the complexity in recruiting, of course, is kids may also want to go somewhere else. So you've got to be, very quick to be able to go to one player to the next. And one of the things that I've always kind of trained, and I know Nick utilizes, but with other programs, is you've got to have your board set in the evaluation. You really have to do it in the summer before you really hit the next class, and even earlier, because you don't have time to say, let's look at a little bit more film on it. You really need to know where you want to go, because immediately if a kid decides, hey, I want to stay closer to home and go to LSU or, wherever, you need to be able to go and move on to your next guy quickly.
Chris Landry, our guest from LandryFootball.com. He was selected to be the NFL Scouting Combine Coordinator in 1993. He served on Bill Belichick's staff with Nick Saban with the Cleveland Browns, started his career as a student assistant at LSU in the mid-1980s, has worked as a scout for the Tennessee Titans and others, and has some great insight. Chris, I want to ask you about, and we know he started it at Michigan State, as you said, and took it to LSU and won a national championship. But in the 10 years that Nick Saban has been at Alabama, he really has changed the landscape of how to run a college football program and college recruiting. We see other programs now mimicking it, obviously. But I remember when he got here, I didn't know what an analyst was. I knew there were 9 full-time assistant coaches. There were 3 or 4 GAs. There might have been a player personnel director, and that was about it. And now we see all this support personnel. We see former head coaches at the college level and even the NFL level becoming analysts for these teams. Just talk about how he's completely changed the way you run a college football program with the success he's had at Alabama, and now it is the blueprint for what everybody does across the country.
Well, I can tell you where it started. When he came to LSU here, and I had recommended him for the job at LSU back when LSU hired DiNardo. And so he ended up, obviously getting it the next go around, and really at that point had to convince him to come to LSU, and he did a good job. But he didn't have all the analysts and whatnot. It was when we were discussing when he went to the Dolphins. He was very fortunate in that he had a very generous owner, and one of the things, he had this plan in place. He learned a lot of it from Belichick, but he basically did this on his own. He came up, and this is where money becomes involved. And one of the things we talked about was the regularity of coaches leaving your staff. So he put in place in Miami with the Dolphins a system where he basically had an assistant coach. Remember the phrase this: every position on the staff had a position coach and an assistant position coach. So he had a running back coach and an assistant running back coach.
Wow.
And of course, you can't do that unless you got an owner willing to do it.
Sure.
And the point was, he lost his defensive line coach. If Dan Quinn, who's now the head coach of the Falcons, the defensive line coach of the Dolphins, moved on and went to Jacksonville or had a promotion, went to Seattle, he didn't have to bring somebody in to learn how he wanted defensive linemen coached or linebackers coached. He had that assistant there, and so he was really important that assistant was kind of that position coach in waiting, if you will. And it was usually a young guy that didn't have to make as much money, that was very eager, and he could train. And a lot of these guys, like Dan Quinn, that are head coaches competing in the Super Bowl that we saw last Sunday. And then, then you'd hire, you lose a guy, then you'd maybe promote him, and then you'd hire another assistant. It was an easier transition. And then you had, a couple of guys that were in a position that assisted the coordinator because you didn't have staff limitations in the NFL. So he goes to Alabama, and you can't have as many people on staff. There are rules. We're trying to get it changed to where you get an extra guy on the staff, 10. But, you got 9 on the staff, and that's it. But there is not any limit to how many people you can put administratively.
Right.
It goes back, and we talked about this. This was the old Nebraska trick under the Bob Devaney and Tom Osborne. They could only have the same staff. but they'd have like 18 guys that were weight room assistants. And there'd be like, 10 of them that worked for football, And so and they usually had football background. So when they spend the off-season workouts, they would run them through some drills because position coaches can't be there, but weight room coaches can. Well, again, you kind of use that trick and that idea that, okay, you can hire people, they're administrative, that can't be on the field coaching, but they can be involved in this. Well, that is a credit to, the success that Nick has had, and it's a chicken egg, the commitment that Alabama has with all the money they make to put the money in, because not everybody has, 15 to 18 analysts that they can put in. And as you mentioned, a lot of them are very well paid that are former head coaches. So they become involved in the system, in recruiting, on the field, analyzing the modern-day technology of breaking down film is so much easier today because it's all digitized. So immediately you can take tape and say, I pull off all the red zone, all the third down, anything you want, and you got different analysts working on this. He will designate, just like Bill Belichick did, what he wants every guy to do, funnel it up, and then he can take it and he can oversee it all. And it just gives a great working environment for all of these guys, and he works them to death, I'm telling you. And these guys learn a lot. And the real brain power is Nick and how he's able to put people in position. And he's got talented people, and he wants ideas, and he challenges them for ideas, just like Bill Belichick did for him and I and the rest of the staff. But he's taken that, and guys have grown with it, and it's become really, really successful. But it doesn't work, if you don't have a situation where, Alabama can put the type of money. And you know what? What's happened? An extra $35 million from the SEC network, the Big Ten networks making money, the Pac-12 network. All of these programs, Gary, are seeing it and saying, you know what, we need to do it. So places like Maryland are saying, hey, we're hiring people. Gary Patterson just hired Sonny Dykes, the former head coach at Cal, as his offensive analyst. And so you're seeing more and more of that, not to the degree that Alabama's doing it, but everybody knows, hey, we got to do it. They got an edge. And that's why he's so successful from a recruiting standpoint, but how you develop players. If you think about it, so many players fall through the cracks and don't develop. For example, there's about 1.1 million high school football players every year. Okay, only 6.5% of them make it to NCAA football at any level, Division III, II, I. And then of those, large percentage, only 15,000 are seniors playing college football. And out of that, only 300 players make an NFL team, and then only 1.6 for them, basically making 1.6% of them that goes from making an NFL team from that group of high school players. So 1.6, and then there's only 150 out of that 1.5 million that make it to the NFL past year 4. So you really need to do a good job of researching, analyzing, so that you don't make a lot of mistakes. Because unlike the years 30 years ago, and I remember Coach Bryant, everybody used to do this, you'd sign 20 running backs a year, and you'd figure out you could scrimmage all year long, you'd figure out who can play, and that's that. Now, of course, you have 25 in a year, 85 overall scholarships. You can't really make a whole lot of mistakes. And when you do, that's why you see transfers and then gray shirts and blue shirts and all those things, red shirts, that contribute to trying to maximize your 85 on your roster.
Chris, you mentioned Dan Quinn serving as Nick Saban's defensive line coach with the Dolphins, hence the connection to Alabama, and Steve Sarkisian. Of course, Pete Carroll played a factor in that as well. You've written about Sark's move from Alabama to the Falcons from both the Alabama perspective and how it played out with Atlanta. I want to get your thoughts because I'm hearing different things here in Tuscaloosa. I have one source tells me that Saban and Sark weren't on the same page. Another guy tells me, no, they loved each other. But it is odd, I guess, after 5 months on the staff, most of that as an analyst, one game as offensive coordinator, Sark leaves. I know it's a great opportunity and so forth, but, Saban, you could say, gave Sark an opportunity to kind of revive his career, and now he's gone. Talk about how that played out and your opinion on how that went down.
Well, let's go back a little bit because I think it's important in context when he hired Lane Kiffin. we discussed it quite a bit. One of the things is Lane. The best way to describe it, guys like Lane, and I think Sark and Lane are different personalities, but they are, I guess the best way to describe it is they're more artistic. Their brains are more artistic from a football standpoint.
Wow.
Nick is more of a scientist. And, for example, Lane not only is he's immature, even though he's young, he's really a little immature, very immature, let's call it like it is. But he's also a little disorganized. In other words, he's someone that really has great vision and concepts and ideas, but, he tends to, go off the reservation a little bit in that, he tends to, you got to rein him in a little bit. So it's a little bit of a strain for Nick to get the most out of it, and he did a good job, and they had success. Lane Kiffin was the reason Sark came. He and Lane are very close. Nick, again, as we just discussed, thought it would be somebody good to come in, another set of eyes, be important, and maybe try to help Lane organize some of his thoughts to make it a little bit better. So I'm going back now, not to this year, but even back over a year and a half, 2 years ago. As things kind of progressed, and obviously we don't need to go into the details, everyone knows that after Lane got the job at FAU, Lane's kind of immaturity started again. At that point, in his eyes, he didn't really need Nick anymore.
He was free.
He was
free
moving
at last.
on. Yeah, so it was kind of, then it became a problem in the preparation for the game against Washington. Well, going forward, and that led to the decision, probably in retrospect, Nick probably should have made the move before that game. But, hindsight's always 20/20. I think with Sark, Sark could have done a very good job. But I think personality-wise, he's been through a lot. And I personally, knowing all three, I don't think Sark, the working under Nick and how he does it and how his personality is, I think would have been he'd have had no problems with Sark, but it would have been a lot of pressure on Sark that maybe he wouldn't have handled it quite as well as he needed to do under pressure. And I think that there began to be a little bit of, okay, let's look at this. That's the reason, one of the reasons, not the only, he felt he was deserving, that he put Mike Loxley in the co-coordinator position. This is Nick already thinking that I need to be prepared and I need to kind of, and Mike had some other opportunities. We know Billy Napier left. We know Mario Cristobal left. Everybody wants to move up, and when they don't, they seek other opportunities. So this was a way to kind of keep Mike in fold. And then as it kind of went forward, the conversation, Sark had, as you mentioned, great connection with Dan Quinn, mainly from Pete Carroll. Now, again, Dan worked a year under under Nick Saban. But as Sark spent a little time with the Falcons over a year, once he got fired from USC, he spent time, like most coaches do, training camps, and he hit it off with Dan Quinn of the Falcons. And the big thing there is Sark had a lot of background in the past, back in the Raiders and Pete Carroll days under Norm Child, the West Coast offense. And that's what the Seahawks run, what the Falcons run. And so that became appealing to Dan, and that's where, obviously Kyle Shanahan was moving on to the Niners. So it just began to kind of develop. Well, Nick was aware of this. I know Nick has said, and I'm not going to dispute it. Nick's got his own message, but if anybody thinks Nick was surprised, and Nick was aware. Dan, with his relationship, kind of, let Nick know that he would be interested in Sark, and what do you think, and yada, yada, yada. And so this kind of became something that was is going to happen 3-4 weeks ago. And so I think that Nick wasn't going to necessarily get rid of Sark, but I think that it is something that he's going to move on and find somebody that's a good fit. But I think that from Sark's standpoint, he felt like it was probably going to be a better situation for him, maybe a better environment for him in Atlanta as opposed to where he was. So I don't know that it was. Listen, it's difficult. I think he's very appreciative for what Nick Saban gave him, but I don't think it's a case where Nick is sitting there at his desk just shocked and devastated that, oh, what am I going to do? He moves on, and he's not moving on as of a couple of days ago. He kind of been moving on for about 3 or 4 weeks, and he's got some things in mind, and we talked about people, and they're different, intriguing ideas. I would expect them to have a really, really good conversation with George Godsey, who was on the Patriots staff with Bill Belichick and worked under Bill O'Brien there in New England and went with Bill to the Texans. And, I wouldn't be surprised if George is involved in some kind of way with the offense. Don't know if it's going to be the coordinator title or co-coordinator title, analyst, or, I don't know. It depends upon George has got a couple of NFL opportunities as well. So that's kind of how it played out. And, I think kind of hopefully a bigger picture brings some clarity to that it's just more, it's not always as sinister as people think. Oh, is this Sark is, I can tell you, Sark's not someone that's going to sit there and talk back, and Lane might do it a little bit, but Sark certainly, I think philosophy, is very, 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 very much of a chameleon. Sark's got a bright mind and can do a lot of things offensively. Now, certainly he'll speak up and give opinions. Nick requires that of his coaches. So while when people say there's disagreements or let me just tell you that there's one voice, one final loud voice in that football. There is no quote unquote, as he said in the press conference, we didn't have a discussion. It was a butt chewing. That's the reality. So there's never any. These guys are not on the same page. There's only one page over there. So I think it's just a matter of, how it played out and how it might be. I don't think things went as smooth in the championship game. Well, no joke. I mean, I don't think it could go as smooth in the certain circumstances. I think he wants to avoid some of that out or somebody flaking out on him. And I think that led to the fact that, hey, pardon the pun, we'll move you out of the nest to the Falcons if that's what you want to do. I think it's a good move for you. There's a lot of collaborative effort, and that may be kind of denied publicly for obvious reasons, but that's a little bit of an insight as to, I think, best for all people. A lot of guys, Doug Nussmeier, it wasn't, quote-unquote, a firing. He helped him get a job. Everybody thinks he's a cold, hard guy. He's not. He's the guy that wants to get his guy a job and move on when he feels there's a better opportunity to help him. He's very, very respectful of the coaching profession. The first-year high school coach to the guy that's, been to, bunch of Super Bowls, he has tremendous respect for coaches in the profession and is always trying to help them.
Chris, I'm getting over on time. I just don't want to end this interview. No, this is such great insight. Real quickly, you mentioned George Godsey. There is a report he's expected to interview for the position of offensive coordinator. Speaking of Saban, all the spread principles in place now. Jalen Hurts, spread quarterback. But I've heard some talk that he might want to get back offensively to pushing the line of scrimmage a little bit, getting back to a more physical approach on offense. Could you see that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that you have to do is you can still utilize all the RPOs and the ability to throw and run with the quarterback, but you got to do a little bit better job, I think, up front, controlling the line of scrimmage. They've got the elite talent, and one of the things that helps them is, like in the championship game, you've got to, and it's like what happened in the Super Bowl. You couldn't get it done if you're Atlanta. Why? And it's different in the pro and college game, but you've got to be great in the 4-minute offense. That's what's Alabama's staple. You want to be able to have the RPOs, do some of the spread concepts, but don't give an inch at the line of scrimmage. Be dominant so that you can power the football. And, the whole key to that offense is to be able to get some points early through the passing game, explosive plays, and then win the game by dominating the line of scrimmage. I think he felt he lost a little bit of that. I think he thought they got a little bit too cute offensively, and I think he wants to bring that back while not giving up some of the spread concepts. Kid from Hawaii who I've studied, Jalen Hurts, they're not drop-back guys. So don't look at in Cooper Bateman, Barnett, they're gone. So I think it's just a matter of trying to not change the offense back completely, but trying to make that happy medium, big controlling at the line of scrimmage, but have that ability with the RPOs and out of the spread set to have the run-pass options out of the quarterback is something that he wants to do to take the next level. He's always looking to improve. Even if he had won the national championship, he'd still be trying to figure out how we can make it better next year. That's the way he does it. He spends a tremendous amount of time in the offseason trying to work on things just like that to get better.
Finally, Chris, I think you and I would agree that Saban probably preferred the way the game was played 10, 12 years ago. And we remember just a few years ago when people were saying the game had passed him by, the spread was his kryptonite. But speaking to his greatness, he embraced what he loathed a little bit in that he, as we said, put the spread principles in place. Isn't that the true greatness of a coach, the ability to evolve, the ability to change, even maybe when it's not your preferred way of playing?
Absolutely. I mean, you got to defend it. You may not want to run it yourself, and you may have to do it kicking and screaming. And it is not what we call traditional football, and I think it's to some degree a little bit dangerous, but you have to evolve. You have to do it. And, if you don't, then you're not going to be able to keep up with what they're doing. And it's a perfect example of you got to change your critical factors that I talk about, right? I mean,
that's right.
All of a sudden, Mark Barron would be a linebacker if he came out today in Alabama. I mean, and things like that or how you do it. You're seeing it more in the conference, but for a while in the SEC, LSU's, the Alabamas, and the power football, you could play that. But now when you get out, you get into the playoffs, you've got to find a way to be able to match up against those teams, and you got to have more guys. You've got to be able to call at the line of scrimmage, make these adjustments. So absolutely, that is the key, and that is something that he's done very, very well, and he's learned that along his way. That is the sign of a great coach, and quite frankly, I love him, but it's what really got Les Miles fired. Great recruiter, but could never evolve, and that program not only consistently lost to Alabama, but they start losing to the Ole Misses and the Arkansas, and and that's why he's out of a job, and that's why Nick Saban is going to go down as the best in history, because no one does a better job of evaluating talent, developing talent, utilizing talent, and week to week putting together a game plan that maximizes his team's chances of winning it. Nobody does a better job of that, and that's why he's the best I think that's ever been.
Well, time flies when you're having fun. I've certainly enjoyed it, Chris. Again, you can follow Chris on Twitter at Landry Football. Also, tell them again about your website. If you want more insight like this, all you have to do is check out your website and become a member.
Well, we take you inside the film room. We started it a couple of years ago that we wanted to provide an avenue for fans. If they want to get an insight of the game of college football, the NFL, the draft, recruiting, you name it, all things football, the X's and O's, we wanted to take you inside the film room and tell you why things are happening. We give you a lot of the inside information of what's going on that people like to hear, and the coaching business or recruiting and the draft and whatnot. But we take you inside the film room. We provide real live recruiting boards, draft boards, evaluations of players. So it's a great opportunity, and obviously, as we said, it's your opportunity as a fan to have your own recruiting office, scouting department at your disposal. So you look at it as you're the owner, and we're kind of your general manager, so to speak, and provide you that information. So we think you'll love it. Check us out at LandryFootball.com. Read about us, and come join us. We know you'll love it.
Let's do it again soon, Chris. Thanks.
Hey, let's do it. Look forward to it, Gary. Thanks a bunch. Thanks for having me.